So now we're back in Sublime Text, and there's one more thing we need to add to our document, to our index.html document, and that's IDs and classes. We need to add these in order to help us facilitate styling it in our CSS style sheet a little bit later on. Now when you look at this, one of the reasons you add IDs and classes, and we're going to go ahead and add it first to our nav element, but if you look at our nav element, you'll notice that it has an unordered list, and there's list items, and there's also links in there, and typically, a nav element, a navigation bar is something you want to do something a little differently with than you would the rest of your website. So I have this content here, unordered list. If I go down and look at other parts of our website and our index.html document, there's an unordered list here. We have unordered list, and we have list items here. We also have, if I go further down, we have a link section. In that link section, we have an unordered list, and we have other list items there. So how do I know, and how does the browser know if I have these other unordered lists and list items to style it differently than the navigation bar that we're going to create here? And that's one of the reasons why you use nav elements and semantically correct elements, but it's also another reason why you use class and IDs. So I'm going to use the class attribute, type class here, and give this particular navigation element a specific class and ID, if you will, or class. And I'm going to use it with the class. I'm going to call it navbar. And that's pretty descriptive, so we know exactly what that is. So this class will be our nav bar. And that way we'll be able to distinguish it by using the nav bar as a selector from the other unordered lists and list items that we have on our document on our website. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here and look at the other sections that we created and create some IDs and our classes with them as well. So this is our first paragraph section right here where we have writing HTML can be fun. I'm going to go ahead and let's add an ID attribute. And inside here we're just going to call this fun. So maybe we'll do some extra things with this when we style our website to make this kind of section pop out and stand out differently than the other parts of our website. So I'm just going to call that fun. It's kind of descriptive. They'll let us know what we want to do with it. Then the next section I'm going to go to, we have our first section. And that was that has our first container, if you will, that had our formatting section and our table section and so forth. I'm going to take this section, the very first wrapper, if you will. And remember we called these wrappers and containers. I'm going to take this class right here, and I'm just going to call this first container. Because we know we set these up in our last exercise to contain various elements. So when we look at our document, our first container has our formatting section, our list section, and our table section, and all three of these are in one container. So I'll go ahead and give that container a name. We've already set it up with our section element. We'll give it a name, and that class will be first container. And let's go down here. At the end of our first container, this is the end of the first container, and this is the beginning of our second container, right here where our images are, and let's give this a class. And we'll call this second container. And notice how we are not capitalizing the first word and capitalizing the second word, second container. So that'll be our second container to have our images section and our links section. And then we'll go down here to our third container that has audio and video, and we'll type in class, and we'll give it third container. So now we have names set up for each of our containers here, and we can do something with this in our CSS style sheet, if you will. So I'm going to save this just to make sure we have it. And although we haven't changed anything on our website, everything still looks the same, even though I've saved it and we can refresh it, everything's still the same. But we've set up in the background the ability to do a lot with our website now that we have our sections, everything sectioned off, and we have IDs and class names for sections and pieces of code. So we have our first container, we have our second container, and now we have our third container at the bottom. And I'll just to give you an idea to show you what that might look like. In the same way that we could take H1 or some other element and make that be, a selector here, we can take an ID, and we have our fun ID, and I'll type fun. You notice how it comes up, and now that becomes our selector. So just like we can use an element, any element as a selector, we can use an ID, and this is how you do the ID. So if I do fun, and I just want to make the text color, let's say I want to make that gold. For some reason I want to make that gold, and let's say I want to take our first container. You can also, and this is how you select the class. You use the dot right here for the class. So for our first container, I'm using dot first container. We'll use our brackets. And let's say I want the color for that to be red. And delete that space right there. So this way, instead of just looking at using H1 or a particular element, I've actually used an ID and the class as a selector. And let's say I want to select just the first container. I have a bunch of things that have sections here. We have sections for all over our document to section things off, and it'll help us when we want to lay out our stuff in a certain format, in a grid format. It'll help us when we want to lay out our stuff. But the fact that I have section elements all over, what if I just want to use one of these section elements and not all of them? So this is what using a class as a selector or an ID as a selector will do for you. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And despite having all of these sections as a first container and a second container, I only want to identify this first container as having had something different. So I'll go up here, we'll go ahead and hit refresh. And then you'll see, voila, there we have our first container is in red. The color of the text is in red. Our ID section that has fun, that's in gold. And then the other sections that we have, even though they have section elements, nothing's been done with them. It hasn't been touched because we haven't done anything to identify them yet in our code, if you will. But this gives you an idea that we can section off just certain particular aspects of our code, because many times you will have to use similar types of elements. You're going to find yourself using a lot of paragraph elements. What if I only want the paragraphs and the text in this particular section, even though I'm using the same element? I want those to be different. Well, how you do that is to use classes and IDs to allow you to style a little differently. So we're going to do more with this as we actually begin to style our document. But I wanted you to see this and set this up on your own as you put through the navigation bar under the nav element. In the opening part, the fun ID in the first section, that's our first paragraph section where the roses are red, violets are blue. And our first container, have the class as first container. Go all the way down to the start of our second container, which is where we have images, start of images, have class second container. And then finally, when we begin audio, have class third container, and we'll be able to then to kind of move forward from there. So we'll move forward with our next exercise and really jump into styling. But I'm glad you had a chance to figure out and look at and take a look at IDs and classes and see there's a lot more you can do with them when you start to actually code a lot of different websites and a lot of different content in your websites.